Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with me, Christian Harris. I'm joined today by Anna Keane, who has recently set up her own business after 20 plus years working in the safety and sustainability space in recruitment, learning, development, training, consulting, and lots of other things. And we have a conversation about the themes, the topics, the blockers, the constraints in those spaces. Anna shares some really good insights on this, as well as looking at some of the things, the strategies we can do to overcome some of these blockers and why it's important to do so. We're talking about sticky middles. We're talking about lots of different models around how we think, sparks of curiosity, and all sorts of things in between. So I'm sure you'll get a lot from this episode. Hope you enjoy it. Cheers.
Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with Christian Harris. We believe that proactive safety and risk management powers business performance. Each week we explore this theme, sharing guests, stories, insights, trends, hints and tips. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, and video versions are available on YouTube. But for now, let's join the conversation with Christian.
Thanks for joining me today, Anna.
Hi, lovely to be here and thank you for having me.
And it's a pleasure. And we're recording this on my birthday as well, so it's a birthday treat.
God, sorry, I forgot. Happy birthday. What a
thank
treat.
you, yeah.
What a way to spend your birthday.
I've been spoilt by my family, and I've been bombarded by messages on this is one of the problems of having a sort of a relatively high profile on LinkedIn. You get bombarded with all these happy birthday messages. But obviously the highlight of my birthday is having this conversation with you.
I was just about to say, I hope you've got more exciting things planned, but I'm delighted to be here. So thank you for spending your birthday with me.
No, it's a real pleasure. So I thought I'd start with on your LinkedIn, you've got a couple of really, really good testimonials from two people who've been on the podcast before, Stuart and Crystal. So how does it feel to kind of have done, really impactful work that has got that kind of feedback from, very well established and well thought of professionals such as the two of them?
God, I didn't know you were going to talk about this. So how do I feel about that? God, I feel hugely privileged and lucky to have worked with people like Crystal and Stuart over my career, and actually have met them at kind of poignant and pivotal times in their careers. So it's a real privilege to do what I do. I feel very fortunate, very grateful that I get to do something that I love, and I get to do it with people that are genuinely passionate about making a difference, and giving them the space, the opportunity, the support. Sometimes, I know Stuart refers to it often as a bit of a, I think called me Mike Tyson once, but a challenging environment, but a safe space to think about themselves, their development, how they're showing up, how they're growing and developing. I think that's a really special thing to be able to provide someone, and I don't take it lightly. I really enjoy playing the kind of behind the scenes supportive role to people. For me, it's about helping them unlock, grow, and then them shining and doing what they do best. So I just feel hugely lucky that I've had the opportunity to work with people like them, and they continue to be my mentors, my coaches, my support as well. So I've worked with both of those individuals for a long time, and I would consider them, friends now, as well as people I've had the privilege of working with. So
Perfect. I always like to start on a how does it feel kind of question, because it brings out
it feels quite emotional actually when I talk about it.
But that's as it should, because obviously what you're doing and the space in which you're working is very impactful on people and important, and so you'd hope that it would bring out that kind of
Yeah,
emotional response.
it does. And both of them, and you know, all the people that I work with, it's testament actually to not what we do in the hours we spend together, but actually how much they push, they challenge themselves, they reflect outside of that work. You know, if I can be a small catalyst of change for someone, then and just give them a little nudge in a different direction, or create space for them to think differently, then yeah, I do it with in the intention of helping them grow and
Mm.
develop and be everything they can be. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Very good. So you've obviously been working in this space for some time now, and there were a couple of key themes that we spoke about before that you were kind of keen to talk about in terms of some of the, I don't know if blockers is the right word, or challenges, or problems, or hurdles, or whatever synonym for that you want to use. But in this kind of training, learning, and development space, where do you see some of these challenges?
So yeah, I've been curiously observing this profession now for 20 years. And I think a couple of things, well, 8, 9 years ago when I set frameworks up, it was my mission was to elevate non-technical development. So recognizing that the profession was focused on technical skills and technical competence, and was missing this whole part of development around what were the non-technical skills, what did development look like in order to kind of move the profession forward. And
Mm,
that's presented me and the clients that I've worked with an incredible journey over the last 8 years. I think now I'm starting to really kind of evolve my thinking on that. And I think kind of observing it and looking at what's happening in the development space, especially within health and safety, is, and I was very much part of this, we've kind of substituted technical skills for non-technical skills. And I
mm,
think the more I get curious around that, the more I'm recognizing actually the work that I need to do, the work that health and safety professionals need to do in terms of their development is much deeper.
mm,
So, and I think we're as guilty of this in safety as we are in any organization, is we consistently focus on developing skills and knowledge, but actually the work I tend to do with people tends to be much more focused on deeper rooted, um, kind of down to identity, values, limiting beliefs, and actually how do we tap into that and work with people at that level in order to unblock. Um, that's It's almost like, if we use the root cause analogy, it's like we found the first blocker or the first thing and we focus there. And actually, sometimes there's something, well, most of the time in my experience, there's something deeper rooted that needs to be unblocked with an individual in order to allow them to acquire skills, deal with complexity, deal with change. So yeah,
mm,
that's kind of my point of curiosity right now.
mm.
And
So we've
and
highlighted
direct
the guys. Sorry, go on.
and just directing a lot of the work that I'm doing with clients and with individuals is, yeah, not just this kind of short, sharp shock of training, but actually working with them over longer periods of time to really dig deep into the kind of mindset, behaviors, how they show up. But yeah, that's kind of my evolving work, I suppose, at the moment.
Mm, mm. Yeah, and I like your analogy to root cause analysis, because it's kind of like we've identified the symptoms, shall we say, but have we actually gone that level deeper to truly solve the problem? And I think you're right that there's always more we can do, and deeper depths that we can not sink to, because that's not the way. That's a more negative expression. But deeper depths we can dive to achieve what we want and what we need to. Just thinking about this, how I'm guessing that this kind of depth of work is going to be predominantly more suitable for more senior people in larger organizations, or is that sort of perhaps a bit of a sweeping generalization?
No, I actually think it's, and one of my focuses is actually how do we make some of this work accessible to,
Yeah.
someone mid-stage career sitting siloed in an organization. And often I've come across people that feel like the square peg in the round hole, like they're stuck. Um, and actually, those two people you mentioned, Crystal and Stuart, when I met both of them, especially Crystal, she was at the very early stages of her career.
Mm.
She was working in isolation and feeling very much stuck. So it's not always about all the work I want to do. I want to ensure that it is accessible. We find ways to get people to challenge their thinking, reflect differently, understand what's blocking their performance, and then give them access to ways of doing work
Mm.
that actually helps them. Accessibility and not just working in a bubble for me is actually really important in this stage of my career. And actually, how do I start to give back? And I'm very fortunate enough to have a community and a network around me that want to also do that. So how do we start to really share insights, understanding things that have worked for other people? So yeah,
Yeah.
that's a real focus of mine right now.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, fully agree. It's one of the reasons why why I do this podcast and I do
yeah,
the safety roundtable webinars, because it kind of just means that anyone can get
yeah,
involved.
yeah,
And you can't do the same uh, level of detail with 100 people as you could with one in an hour, as you could if you did with one-to-one training with one
yeah,
person for 100 hours. Um, you know, Clearly those two things are different. But yeah, trying to make it accessible and trying to just shift mindsets, I suppose, is
yeah.
the key to
Exactly.
unlocking it, isn't it? That first kind of light bulb moment, I suppose, is the really important bit here.
Yeah, those sparks. Like, how do you just challenge people's thinking enough that it sparks curiosity, it sparks further reflection, it sparks them to go away and explore things differently and look in different places. And it's that catalyst, that sparking that I'm really excited about being able to kind of do and
Mm.
support people with. Um, and getting them to actually recognize in themselves whether they might be trapped in cycles of, you know, God, the amount of people I work with when it comes to like their development plan, and it's like, I want to do this course or I want to work on something quite broad, like I want to work on my communication skills. Okay, what does that actually mean? Like, what is the difference you want to see, and where are the blockers?
Mm.
Um, is it an acquisition of skill and knowledge, or is it something deeper? I always use the example of curiosity. I think it's like it's one of my favorite words, but actually when we talk about developing people's curiosity, and I always have clients come to me and go, I want my team to be more curious. We've given them, learning teams, we've given them active listening, questioning skills, we've given them permission to actually go and spend time being more curious. But actually, when I start working with people, it's in order to be curious, you have to let go of being right.
Mm.
In order to be curious, you have to be willing to understand other people's perspectives. You have to be able to let go of some of your expertise. And I think for this profession in particular, that is really challenging. So you
Yeah.
have to be curious about other people's perspectives that might be different to yours. All of those things is not necessarily something you can learn in a classroom setting or in a training course, but it's that mindset, that willingness to let go of part of your identity, a part of your credibility, in order to actually start to genuinely be curious about what else is out there. So
Yeah.
yeah, sometimes we're kind of going in that kind of superficial, someone in my network calls it the kind of blame, shame, retrain cycle. Someone
Hmm.
doesn't get it, so we blame them for it, then we shame them for it, then we retrain them. And then when we can't do that, we tell ourselves stories that they don't want to do it, and then we move them on. And
Yeah.
actually, yeah, I feel like there's deeper work to do.
Mm. Yeah, it's very interesting, this whole thing around curiosity, and as you say, about this safety profession in particular, because obviously if you're the health and safety leader in an organization, you have that level of responsibility, but you also have that kind of level of trust from your colleagues, that they're trusting in you, that everything's safe, fundamentally everything's, you wouldn't see it as perfect, but they would sort of see it as perfect. We're ticking every box, we're doing this, we're doing that. And so having that kind of weight of expectation on the one hand, and having somewhere in between your knowledge and training and
Yeah.
technical skills and experience and so on, but then on the other hand, having that kind of curiosity, it sort of doesn't quite match up, does it? That kind of willingness to look
It's
outside and to, yeah.
it's the tension, and I love tensions and polarities. I was introduced them by one of my old team at Acre. Brilliant guy called John Whitfield introduced me to polarities 2 years ago, and this kind of and thinking. And I think safety professionals in particular are very focused on binary. It's one or the other. When I
Mm,
started talking about non-technical skills, the amount of pushback I got from people was just like, well, technical skills are important. I was like, I didn't say they weren't. I said it's an and. It's right or it's wrong, it's legal or it's not, it's safety one or it's safety two. Like, actually, what happens if we really got intentional about being the curious expert? So we can still keep all of our expertise, we can still keep all of our knowledge, but we can also dial up our curiosity. What would that look like? And
mm,
I see so many tensions in the work I do with clients. How are you assertive and empathetic? How are you detail conscious and big picture? And actually, sometimes it's because we are thinking binary, we're pendulum swinging from, in
mm,
order to be more curious, I have to completely let go of my expertise. You don't. You just need to dial up other things. And that whole concept of giving people visibility of these tensions that exist in their role, and actually sitting with them to explore what the upside of both of those things could look like, and what are the strategies, what are the techniques that they could use, is a lot of the work that I do. I think it's one of the biggest blockers to the health and safety profession, is
mm,
this, we think of ors rather than ands.
yeah. So what tends to be the tipping point or that spark where somebody changes their mindset, or opens their mind in some way to being willing to look at this differently? What tends to be the catalyst for that?
Um, Understanding why it matters, or why, and that's why I love working with this profession and with sustainability professionals, is there is a moral driver to this work, like
Yeah.
reconnecting with that purpose. We're not just doing it for progression or ego. So many of the people that I work with, their intention is about getting people home safe and well.
Mhm.
So to make it happen, like make it matter, like actually, why should I look at myself? There's a line that I use from a children's stories, if you want to, The Lion Inside, which is a story about a mouse and a lion.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you
Know the
know
one.
it. Yeah. And it's, if you want things to change, first you have to change you. And actually, that's the work that I encourage health and safety professionals to do on a daily basis. Is, if you want to create change within your organization, if you want to get people home safe at the end of every day, you have a responsibility to look at yourself and to look at
Mm,
how you can change and evolve and do things differently. And I say that with no judgment. I just say it with, that's the work. That's what you need to do. You can create that change, but it's going to require you to step into a different mindset, to
mm,
develop more tools in your toolkit, to take your development seriously. And I think all too often we attach development to progression, and not everyone wants to be the next, global vice president or
no,
whatever.
yeah.
Actually, we need to tap into this. We do it because it's about people and it's about care. And that's often the hook that I use. I strongly in my practice, I use compassionate challenge, kind challenge with my clients. I think it's really important. It shouldn't be a series of nice chats. It should be something that feels a little edgy, a little
Yeah.
tense, a little gritty. Because actually in that discomfort is where the change happens. And I know that, coaching, therapy, supervision, the whole ecosystem of people that I have around me, you need to get not comfortable with that discomfort. I don't think you can, but actually you need to recognize that that discomfort needs to happen in order to grow and change and learn.
Mm. Yeah, and I think from my experience, the um, if you're closed-minded on the kind of softer skills, then you're also blocking yourself on your technical skills, because yes, you could have your qualifications, but actually, you know, that's only you're never an expert by having your
No.
qualifications. And I think sometimes people um, will sort of rest their laurels on, I've got this level of qualification and I do things this way. But actually, if they open their mind to maybe doing things a bit differently in some of these softer skills, it might
Mm.
then open their mind to the fact that they could improve in the technical skills, and then it should work like a virtuous circle, and you just keep improving and keep getting those better outcomes that you mentioned.
And development's an infinite game. And one of my biggest concerns for a lot of health and safety professionals is the advancement of kind of AI and tech. Some of the stuff I've seen over the last few weeks as I've been kind of starting to explore this area is actually that expertise, that the qualifications, the knowledge base actually is going to be so much more accessible. And
Yeah.
actually, therefore, we really need to get back to the human-centered element of this role, how we
Mm.
apply that learning. How do we, and if we just leverage this expertise, this credibility constantly, actually, we miss out on the opportunity to really build trust with the people we're working with, to influence, to engage. Yet there's a whole, actually, to make change and have the impact we want to, if we just
Mm.
rely on that technical expertise, it's
Yeah.
it's limiting not just the individual, like the professional, but actually every person they come into contact with. So
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a topic that I'm really interested in, and I've spoken a bit about on the podcast before. And it calls actually back to what you were saying, that if you have a growth mindset, I know you didn't use that expression, but if you have a growth mindset and you're curious, um, that situation you've presented, you could see as a big opportunity, because actually you might say to yourself, well, yeah, all this functional stuff, um, the policies and the procedures and the technical knowledge is going to be done by AI in some way, shape, or form, or at least, version one will be done by AI, a lot of the legwork. And therefore that means I can, rather than having to spend, perhaps 50% of my time on that and 50% on the kind of more vital stuff around communication, soft skills and development, I might be able to spend 70% of my time in that area, and only 30 in the other. Whereas if you've got the kind of converse mindset, you could be really worried. I'm going to be out of a job. I'm not going to. So again, it's all
And
coming
that
back to the mindset.
fear, that fear is tangible, like palatable with the people that I work with, because
Mm.
actually, I'll hear, God, if I had a pound for every time I'd heard, well, I don't have time to. Actually, I think a lot of that blocker is around, if I actually go out and do things differently, do I lose my credibility? Do I expose myself to not adding value, or do I expose myself to a lack of job security? But actually, that's the work I want. I meet that with no judgment, but I do want to compassionately support and challenge people to see that actually the role is changing, it's
Mm.
evolving, and that they have a responsibility to look at how they do things differently. I used to talk quite I was quite passionate in my 30s, maybe I'm softening in my 40s, about actually you will become redundant, you'll become irrelevant, but actually how do we really start to see that it's not just about the profession, it's actually about the impact the profession is having in the world of work. And it's about this greater sense of purpose of getting people home safe at the end of every day. So yeah, it's any change can be uncomfortable, terrifying to some, especially if you've got like 30 years of doing something one way, and then, people like me coming in and going, okay, now we're going to start looking to evolve your role. But that's why I think doing it with compassion, doing it with kindness, but doing it with challenge as well, is really important. Really important.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, do you see the AI sort of trend as a opportunity or a challenge? Where do you sort of sit on that scale?
I I see it as an opportunity. I
Mhm.
think I always see things like that as an opportunity. Actually, how do we design out the things that slow us down? How do we make it more accessible? How do we include those doing the work in understanding? How do we divest that knowledge? How do we learn? Like, how do we use data and insight to learn as organizations and across organizations? I think there's so much opportunity, but then again, it comes back to the mindset of the individual that's interacting with it.
Yeah.
And especially as the profession, if we are going to make most use of it, we have to be sat in what I often refer to as like creator consciousness, actually, in one where we're driving it rather than being at the will of it. Um, and we need to go and get curious about the capability of it. It's coming. Like, like whether we want
Yeah.
to or not, we can stick our head in the sand, or we can go and actively look at how it can enhance the work we do. It can help the organizations we work with. It can help the people doing the work. And I think
Mm.
that's the really exciting time, like, and
Yeah.
place for us to play.
Yeah. 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 I sort of say it's a wave, and you got two choices. You can try and surf the wave and get on top of it, or you can sort
Mhm.
of stand on the shore and wait for the wave to crash
Yeah.
over you. And I know which one I would rather be
Yeah,
doing.
exactly. Exactly. I think there's some work that I talk to quite a lot at the moment, which I encourage every health and safety professional, actually every human being, to go and get, and that's exploring something called the drama triangle. I don't know if you'll have ever come across that, but
No, I
the
haven't. No.
drama, I know it was one of these huge light bulb moments for me. So the drama triangle is a model of psychotherapy based in transaction analysis, but it talks about three roles. So hero, which is very much the role often of the safety professional, like a desire to remove pain. The villain, so that villainous energy, someone's to blame, and then victim. And we're all kind of the construct or the framework looks that we're all vying to be the greatest victim. But we spend a lot of time on this triangle. And I think especially as safety professionals, it's like, well, AI could be the next villain,
Mm.
and that we're at the will of it. But actually, how do we shift into more of a empowerment, creator consciousness, where we're actually starting to think of the world happens by us, not to us, and
Mm.
that's that shift from fear to curiosity. And that's a lot of work I do with teams and individuals at the moment, is kind of giving them that kind of construct and that framework to think about. Because if you're doing an incident investigation, but you're doing that from drama, it's going to look very different from doing it from sort of that creator consciousness. So this is, when I talk about that deep work, that mindset work, it's actually what is the lens that we're looking the world through. And
Mm.
I think it's really interesting in the world of safety around that relationship we have with ourselves, with others, the fear, the blame, like, we're moving around that drama triangle on a minute by minute basis. And how do we have agency and choice to do something different?
Mm.
Um,
And also, it's overcoming the battle of how others perceive us, because we're probably being perceived in that hero space.
Mm.
But actually, how do we feel inside, where we might be feeling like we're closer to the victim or the villain using that triangle?
Yeah,
Um,
and actually, the only thing we can take responsibility for is how we show up. And I've long talked about like the R number. it was around the COVID time, funnily enough, but there's kind of this ripple and this impact we can have, and professionals can have, that they can actually start to change that brand, change that perception on an interaction by interaction basis. Like every interaction, they can delight, surprise, um, start to challenge that, or they can continue to nurture that stereotype, that perception. And I think that's within everyone's gift, is to think about actually, what could I do differently? How could I show up differently? But that takes work. It takes, looking at yourself, looking at the mirror, like having some challenge and trying things differently. But yeah, I think, it's an infinite game, as I say.
Yeah, I'm going to steal the R8 analogy because I like that.
It was an early conversation. I think it might have been with Stuart actually around when I set frameworks up, we talked about rebranding health and safety one individual at a time. So if we could actually create change, then you create this. And yeah, it must have been around COVID time we started talking about what was your infection rate. So are you positively impacting people? Are you compounding? Are you reinforcing that stereotype? And I think that's a question we all need to look at. Are you part of the solution, the future focused, or are you reinforcing it? And again, no judgment, just curiosity on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've done Crystal's podcast, haven't you, with her and Elisa?
Yeah.
So I did an episode of that, and they were like, "Oh, so what do you want to talk about?" I said, "I'd love to talk about like getting people to be more active on social media because I'm really interested in this, and I've seen the power of it myself." But that analogy of the R rate is really relevant to social media and putting yourself out there, because whether you're doing it within your business one-to-one, influencing people and having those conversations, or whether you're doing it on LinkedIn, let's say, but if you're not there and you're not doing it, then that R rate is always going to be 1.
Yeah.
So you've got to make the effort and be active to push it up.
And it comes back to that accessible point, doesn't it? And I know when I think about like what I want to do over the next few years, how do I take my experience, my insight, and also all the insight of the people in my network to then go and help and support, inform, inspire that kind of next wave of people coming through. And I feel like if I can be a conduit for that learning, an access point, then again, maybe one that I need to challenge myself on what is my R number. So it's a good way to think about it. And that I love authenticity and agency are 2 words that I use a lot. I do a female leadership program with a group called Mentoring Circle, which is just joy. And we talk about actually how do you really get authentic, understand who you are, what you want to project, what you're passionate about, and then actually how do you take agency and choice? Like we have those 2 things that within our taking. And how can you be that catalyst of change? How can you take responsibility for that? However small the change is, wherever you are in the org structure, whether you're one person on your own or in a big team, how do we personally make that change?
Yeah. I think and comparison is the thief of joy. Is that the expression?
Yeah.
Which is relevant to this because I saw a post by this guy called Alex Hormozy, who you might have heard of. He's like a big sort of business marketing type influencer, and he said, he put a post out the other day, and he's got millions of followers and whatever, but he put a post out on social media, I think it was on Instagram, I saw it, and he was like, 0 connections, 0 followers, 0 influence. That's where everyone starts. So don't compare, just start. Don't compare yourself to somebody that's miles ahead. Just think, well, they started there as well. That's where I can get to, be inspired by that, rather than looking at it as, I'll never get there, or I can never compete with that, or I can never achieve that.
Yeah. And I think there is, you mentioned growth mindset earlier. I use Carol Dweck's work when we look at growth mindset, and there is an element of that, of how we perceive others' success. And in a fixed mindset, it's we're almost kind of jealous, we critique it. And in a growth mindset, we're just curious and we want to learn. What have they done? What can I take from that? And I really kind of lean into that. I think there is so much work to be done. There will always be more, that kind of abundance mindset, for want of a better term. And actually, how do we get curious about other people? What are they doing? What could we take from that? What could we learn? Is kind of an antidote, I suppose, from that comparison part, I think.
And that's kind of the point I was making with Crystal and Lisa is, we should be speaking more about all the great stuff that we do as a profession. And if we just bottle it up and keep it internally to ourselves, then we're not enabling everyone else to benefit from it.
And I think, kind of, what are we doing well? Also, what hasn't gone well, but we've learned from. Like, I think is a really, I do a series of events, and it's a really funny one that this profession focuses on, like, failure very often. And then we stand on stages and we just talk about what went well. And actually, how do we, again, this kind of pendulum swing between two things, but actually, how do we also talk about, we tried that and it didn't work, but here's what we learned. I'm a big fan of kind of learning through success and failure.
One of the best presentations I've ever seen was by I can't remember who it was exactly, but it was somebody from Merlin after the Alton Towers Smiler incident a few years after, and they basically just broke down, every single thing that went wrong and why and what they learned from it. And that was just really powerful, because everyone was aware of it and it was all kind of in the public domain, obviously, but just actually it was refreshing to just sort of see, like, this was wrong and this was wrong and this was wrong and this was wrong, rather than, as you say, sort of overlooking the challenges and just going through to and wasn't it great in the end? And
and wherever we are trying to do things differently, trying to make progress, and I sit with my clients in this all the time, the first time you go and have a more challenging conversation with a stakeholder, it's not going to be your best performance. Of course it's not. You need to do the reps. You need to try things differently. You're going to fail, but in that failure comes learning, comes growth. I can think of, like, multiple failures I've made in my career that have then gone on to inform and change the way I work. And I still see and I still make them on a daily basis. That's why I'm big into the practice of reflection. What went well? What didn't go well? What do I do differently? I do that after pretty much everything I do, because that's sitting in that learning cycle, but also recognizing that without that reflection, I won't get the real value of that learning. So, simple frameworks, I think, sometimes help, but
definitely. Talk to me about the sticky middle.
I don't know where this term's come from, apart from again, looking at what I do since leaving Acre and kind of going out on my own, I'm very fortunate not to have worked with a lot of people now who are at the top of their game. But I've been really kind of introspective and actually talking to a lot of them and spending time with them over the last few months, really understanding, like, where can I have most impact, has shone a light on a group of people who I believe are sat in what I call the sticky middle. So this isn't like the first entry point of your career, because I think we invest quite heavily with people quite early on. And then when we get to the dizzy heights of leadership, we again invest in people. But there's this group of people in the middle who are either stuck in the middle of an org chart, maybe they've been really successful doing their job and then they get recognized for it, and then suddenly they're responsible for other people doing the job that they once did. Or they are stuck in the middle of change, so they can see where they want to get to, but they maybe don't have the skills, the exposure, the experience to get there. Or like you spoke about earlier, this kind of like they're sat in a silo. So they're the kind of people that I see. It's the stuck is a feeling. It's knowing you want to do something different, but you don't know how to get there. And actually, some of this group is still a bit in the dark, I suppose, for want of a better term, around like needing to change and evolve. But that's where I want to focus my energy and efforts over the next, I don't know, 5-10 years. I don't look that far ahead in terms of, I see my career as a bit like building blocks. But this is my next kind of mission. So how do we give them insights, growth, development? How do we understand the challenges they're facing? And then how do I, through my network, through people I know and have worked with, how do I start to share some of that insight with this group? I think it's the challenges they face in that middle part of their career is really unique, and there's a lot around evolving identity and what does success look like. I think there's a lot of personal exploration. There's different skills that need acquiring. But they're the future, and they also, for many of the clients that I work with, they're either the blocker or the catalyst to wider change. So, a lot of the leaders I work with will have ambition around changing, transforming, and actually it's maybe the next layer down in the org chart that actually are responsible for taking that on, moving through it, but they're going through their own development journey. So how do we get really curious? How do I get really curious? How do I get really supportive of that sticky middle layer?
So a couple of things then that come to mind. Firstly, in terms of what you just said, my experience is that leadership teams, boards, typically, well, it might be a platitude, but they'll at least say that they, really care about safety. Many times they do. Sometimes it's a platitude. But when you get down to the kind of shop floor level in organizations, often that message is not being borne out because of the lack of resources or whatever it might be. And there's obviously something, as you say, something in the middle that's stopping the rollout or the implementation. So kind of agree with that. And then in terms of the profile of the person we're talking about here, would it be analogous to using an example that people would understand that's outside of safety, maybe like sales, where you join a business and in a sales team and you get a lot of training and support and you become really good at selling, and then you sell and sell and sell, and then at some point you're the most successful salesperson, and so you get promoted into being a sales manager, and then all of a sudden you've actually got a whole different skill set, a whole different role that you're not actually potentially well suited for, just because you've done well in the kind of technical side of below that level. You're now here and it's like, well, what am I doing?
And I spent the first 13 years of my career in a sales environment in recruitment, and actually, like, that's what we did, and that's what we still do in that world. We take our best recruiters and then we put them into people leadership roles. And having profiled recruiters as well as others, you need to be disciplined, selfish with your time. You need to be like laser focused on, like, actually that often feels in tension with being team-centered, supportive, high caring, and we don't equip people to go through that transition. I can put that into finance. I can put that into IT. Every profession has this sticky middle, but as organizations, we seem to be not equipped. It's almost like we go into this, I don't know, Darwin kind of survival of the fittest with the middle of our organization. It's like, oh, you might get it or you might not. But actually, like, there's a huge identity shift. So if you've been successful doing a job and all of your identity, your credibility, your value sits in doing that, and then suddenly you have to start to divest that off to other people, and you have like, I work with people and they're like, well, I'm not doing anything anymore. And I'm like, well, you are, but your role is different. But we move from I love the analogy of an orchestra. You move from like playing an instrument to running a section to being the conductor. They're very different roles. Your level of oversight, what you need to do, but you can't keep dipping down and playing, a violin. You need to actually operate at the right level. But that change, that's a developmental threshold that people need to go through, but we don't give them the right level of support. So I'll focus on this in safety and sustainability because that's my sweet spot.
Yeah.
But I think the sticky middle is something that every organization needs to look at in terms of how it evolves, promotes, but also how do we give people choice and agency again at that stage? Because not everyone wants to lead people. Well, not everyone, like their preference set should mean. And actually, how do we reorganize organizations to allow for just really good technical experts or really good individual contributors? And I think that's a conversation that I'm starting to have more and more so as I do work in kind of designing safety teams and sustainability teams. Actually, how do you balance that? How do you build teams that actually people are playing to their strengths? And how do we design careers that they're just not always, linear? How do we actually start to deconstruct some of the way we evolve careers now? How do we look at breadth of role, evolution of skill set, transformational tours? Yeah, all of that kind of.
And it strikes me that the cost of getting this wrong is massive, because we've spoken about the organizational challenges of things getting stuck. But then there's the personal, which is also the personal, challenges where somebody's kind of disillusioned or whatever. So it sounds like, this is hitting both sides, isn't it? It's hitting the individual, it's hitting the organization. So therefore it is something that we should be really focusing on trying to overcome.
It's definitely a critical business need in terms of creating a sustainable, like, talent pipeline, that transformation and change, definitely critical. But yeah, the stress that individuals go through. When I meet in, like, when I work with people and they're feeling stuck or they're struggling, it's usually because they haven't got the tools in their toolkit, or there's a level of limiting self-belief, or, unlocking that doesn't just mean they're more productive, it means they're happier. And, it means that they actually can thrive in the workplace. So rather than just kind of this top-down approach, actually, both how do we support the individual to grow, to develop, to expand their capacity for complexity, for change, all the things that are, coming at us at pace. And then also as organizations, how do we look at how we create different development pathways, different career pathways for people? How do we have open and transparent conversations around people's careers, their growth, in a really intentional way? And I think, we talk about well-being and we talk about creating environments where people can thrive. I think development, growth is such a huge component of that. And the way people are led and managed and, supported.
Yeah, definitely. No, fully agree with that. So for anyone that's joined us on this conversation, which I found really, really insightful, what would you recommend in terms of any kind of maybe some resources or like books or podcasts or anything like that you could recommend, other than, of course, reaching out to you and having a chat, which we'll talk about in a minute as well.
Definitely do reach out. And I'm currently just compiling. I've always had a learning list, which I'm happy to share with anyone that kind of reaches out. And I, a few weeks ago, actually started to crowdsource more ideas. So how do we get kind of podcasts, books, depending on certain areas and challenges people are facing. So people can definitely get in contact and I'll share that with them. I'm going to be doing something around kind of sharing people's stories and experiences. So again, this is, 4 or 5 months into running my own business and it being a little hectic. This is definitely in the works. I would encourage people to go, things I've spoken about today, the drama triangle, navigating polarities. There is so much out there. I think, the work you're talking about in terms of building your profile and getting connected with LinkedIn. LinkedIn isn't just about positioning yourself, it's about learning. And actually, there are so many incredible people to go and follow. But I'm really happy to connect with anyone and understand kind of what are the challenges they're facing. I really want to hear from people if that sticky middle piece has really
Yeah.
resonated.
Yeah.
Like what are the challenges people are facing? And
Yeah.
happy to help.
Perfect. So just drawing things to a close on that, I mean, feel free to just maybe set out kind of what the offering is, what the business does, kind of at a headline level, so people can, we've spoken about some really interesting and important topics. I'm sure, those have created some of those sparks of curiosity that we mentioned. So, how can you help, I suppose?
Okay. So the kind of mantra for the work I do is good work with good people that makes a difference. So, and something I've learned over the last 20 years of my career is every organization, every individual is different. So I really believe in kind of working with, whether it's an individual or a team, or at an organizational level, really to understand like what are the challenges, like genuinely what are the challenges. And then using my skills experience. So anything from like coaching, facilitation, training and development. I do some really like interesting work on advising around kind of hiring strategy and team structure. So it tends to be, it's focused on that safety, that sustainability team, making sure that they're highly effective, that they're impactful, that they're driving their agenda forward and equipping them with the skills and the development to do that. So yeah, it can be anything from coaching one individual through to working with a team around like a long-term change program. But if they're embarking on change within their strategy and approach, how are they equipping themselves with the right development to do that?
Perfect.
So,
And yeah, perfect. And the best way to get in touch, is it on LinkedIn or website?
yeah, LinkedIn. Still need to build a website. It's on the long to-do list. But yeah, LinkedIn. Really happy for people to reach out directly, and yeah, happy to have a chat.
Yeah, if there's any consolation, we did have a website and it kept getting hacked, so we took it down probably about 18 months ago now. And since then, we've literally just had a one-page like landing page for our website. But our business has continued to grow and grow and grow
Yeah,
during that period. So I do think it's important to have a website, but I would, yeah,
keep it
it's not
light.
as big. It's not as big a priority as people
Yeah.
sometimes think.
No, and I'm a bit old school. I really like just drinking coffee and having chats and
Yeah.
seeing what happens. So
Perfect.
yeah,
So if you want a free coffee, you know
love a
who to
coffee.
contact.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Well, thanks very much, Anna. Really enjoyed it. Learned a
Really
lot,
enjoyed
and
it.
yeah, very, very valuable stuff. So really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
And
Thank you for having
yeah,
me.
and thanks for joining Anna and I today. And look forward to seeing you for next week's episode of the podcast. Cheers.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk. See you next week for another episode.